September 12, 1946, 8:15 p.m., Madison Square Garden, New York City. The air inside the arena is thick enough to chew on, a blue haze of cigarette smoke trapped under the rafters, swirling in the heat generated by 20,000 bodies. It's loud, not just sports game loud, but politically charged, desperate, hopeful loud. The war is over, but the peace feels fragile, like thin ice cracking underfoot. You can feel the humidity sticking your shirt to your back. The crowd here isn't the establishment. These are the believers, the progressives, the union men, the people who still worship the memory of FDR. And tonight, they aren't here for Harry Truman. They are here for their champion. The man stepping into the blinding glare of the Klieg lights looks less like a political brawler and more like a bewildered Iowa farmer who wandered onto a Broadway stage. His hair is a mess, his suit rumpled. But when Henry Wallace, the Secretary of Commerce and former Vice President of the United States, raises a hand, the roar is deafening. To these people, he is the rightful heir to Roosevelt's legacy. To the man sitting in the Oval Office in Washington, he is becoming a dangerous liability. Wallace grips the podium. He adjusts the microphone. The crowd quiets down, leaning in. They want red meat. They want to hear that the United States shouldn't be bullying the Soviet Union. They want to hear that the emerging Cold War is a mistake. And Henry Wallace delivers. The tougher we get, the tougher the Russians will get, Wallace's voice booms through the scratchy PA system. He condemns British imperialism. He suggests that the United States has no business interfering in Eastern Europe, effectively carving up the globe into spheres of influence, a direct contradiction to what the United States is currently arguing for on the world stage. Back in Washington, the reception is very different. The press corps is already tearing through the advance copies of the speech like sharks in the water. They can't believe what they're reading. The Secretary of Commerce isn't just stating a personal opinion. He is effectively torpedoing the foreign policy of his own president. At this exact moment, thousands of miles away in Paris, James F. Burns, Truman's Secretary of State, is sitting across the table from Vyacheslav Molotov, Stalin's stone-faced foreign minister. Burns is playing a high stakes of poker, trying to hold the line against Soviet expansion, trying to show that America is united and firm. He is trying to project strength. And here is Henry Wallace, back home, telling the world that Burns is wrong, telling the world that America is the aggressor. The reaction in the garden is mixed, boos from the anti-communists, wild cheers from the leftists, but the reaction in the halls of power is nuclear. President Truman, earlier that day, had told reporters he had read the speech and approved of it. A mistake. A massive, clumsy, catastrophic mistake. Did he read it? Did he just skim it? Did he simply not understand that Wallace was advocating for a surrender of moral authority? As Wallace steps off the stage in New York, wiping sweat from his brow, smiling that shy, lopsided smile, he thinks he has struck a blow for peace. He thinks he has saved the democratic soul. He has no idea that he has just lit the fuse on his own political execution. The teletype machines in Paris start chattering. Secretary Burns reads the transcript of what Wallace just said. His face goes pale, then red. He looks at his aides. If the Secretary of Commerce speaks for the President, then who does the Secretary of State speak for? Burns realizes he looks like a fool in front of the Russians. In Washington, the phone lines at the White House light up. Senators are furious. The British are apoplectic. The press is running headlines asking who is actually in charge of the United States government. Truman is suddenly wide awake to the reality of what just happened.
He is no longer the accidental president walking in FDR's shadow. He is a man watching his administration fracture in real time. He realizes that this isn't just a difference of opinion. This is insubordination, and worse, it makes him look weak. The following morning, the sun rises over Washington, D.C. that feels like a battlefield. The chatter in the mess halls and the corridors of the State Department is singular. Wallace has to go. But firing Henry Wallace isn't like firing a clerk. Wallace is a symbol. He represents the soul of the New Deal, the dream of the century of the common man. If he cuts him loose, he risks alienating the entire left wing of his party right before the midterm elections. Truman sits at his desk, the disastrous headlines staring back at him. He tries to downplay it. He tries to say he only approved Wallace's right to speak, not the content of the speech. It's a clumsy lie, and nobody buys it. The pressure is mounting. The atmosphere in the Oval Office is suffocating. Truman is trapped between a Secretary of State threatening to resign and a Secretary of Commerce who refuses to shut up. He has to make a move. The world is watching. Stalin is watching. And in Paris, Jimmy Burns sends a cable to the White House that effectively puts a gun to Truman's head.
September 19, 1946. The White House, Washington, D.C. The cable from Paris doesn't just arrive, it detonates. It sits on the president's desk like an unexploded shell. It's a teletype from James Burns, sent over a secure line from the Paris Peace Conference. The words are cold, professional, and devastating. Burns, usually a master of compromise, has stopped negotiating. He lays it out plainly. The world cannot have two secretaries of state. The Soviet Union cannot be told two different things by the same government. If Henry Wallace is allowed to continue undermining American foreign policy, then Burns cannot do his job. And then comes the kicker. Burns offers his resignation. It is an ultimatum, pure and simple. Him or me. Harry Truman reads the message, his jaw set tight. You can imagine the heat rising in his face. Truman is a man who values loyalty above almost everything else, but he also despises being cornered. And right now, he is trapped in a corner of his own making. If he accepts Burns's resignation, he signals to Stalin that the United States is retreating, that the hardliners have lost, and that American resolve is crumbling. If he keeps Burns, he has to publicly humiliate or fire the darling of the Democratic Party's left wing. He grabs a pen and starts writing in his diary. He doesn't mince words. He calls Wallace a pacifist and a dreamer. He vents his frustration at the all-Russia boys who seem to think Stalin is just a misunderstood saint. But writing in a diary won't fix the mess in the newspapers. Truman calls Wallace to the White House. The meeting takes place in the Oval Office. The contrast between the two men couldn't be starker. On one side, Harry Truman, haberdasher, artillery captain, political machine survivor, a man of concrete facts and hard decisions. On the other, Henry Wallace, geneticist, intellectual, mystic, a man who looks at the horizon and sees a utopia where others see a storm. Wallace walks in, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. He brings with him that maddening air of moral superiority. He doesn't think he's done anything wrong. In his mind, he is helping Truman. He believes he is saving the president from the warmongers in the State Department. They sit. The conversation is tense, though civil. Truman, trying to salvage the situation without an explosion, pushes for a compromise. He needs silence. He needs Wallace to stop talking about foreign policy while the Paris conference is ongoing. Henry, effectively, Truman says, you have to zip it. Wallace hesitates. He argues his case. He talks about the imperialist British and the need for understanding Russia. Truman nods, listening, but his patience is fraying like an old rope. He doesn't want a philosophy lecture. He wants message discipline. Finally, they reach an agreement, a truce.
Wallace agrees to make no more public statements on foreign affairs until the Paris conference concludes in late October. It's a gag order, dressed up as a gentleman's agreement. Wallace leaves the White House beaming. He walks out to the swarm of reporters waiting on the North Lawn and tells them everything is fine, everything is lovely, he says. He acts as if he and the president just had a friendly chat about corn yields. Truman watches from the window, likely rubbing his temples. He thinks he has bought himself time. He thinks he has put the lid back on the boiling pot. He issues a brief statement confirming the agreement. The crisis, it seems, has been managed. But in the chaotic world of 1946 politics, silence is a vacuum that demands to be filled. The truce lasts less than 24 hours. The press smells blood. They know Wallace has been muzzled, and they know Burns is furious. The narrative isn't Democratic Party united. The narrative is President gags cabinet member to appease hardliners. Then the final straw, a leak. Reports start swirling that Wallace isn't just speaking off the cuff, he has been documenting his dissent for months. A private letter Wallace wrote to Truman back in July, a long, rambling missive urging a softer stance on Russia, suddenly becomes the talk of the town. The contents are leaked to the press. Now Truman looks duplicitous. It looks like he knew about Wallace's views all along, ignored them, then panicked when they went public, and is now trying to cover it up. Truman is reading the morning papers on September 20th, and the rage finally boils over. He realizes that Henry Wallace isn't just a nuisance, he is a cancer on the presidency. As long as Wallace is in the cabinet, Harry Truman is not fully the president. He is just a referee between warring factions. The time for managing is over. The accidental president is done being accidental. He picks up the phone. He doesn't call Wallace. He calls for his press secretary, Charlie Ross. He calls for a pen. He is going to write a letter. And this time, he isn't going to ask for silence. He is going to demand a head on a platter.
September 20th, 1946, 9:30 a.m. The Oval Office, Washington, D.C. The morning light filtering through the heavy drapes does nothing to warm the room. Harry Truman sits alone at the resolute desk. The clutter of the last week, the telegrams, the newspapers, the conflicting advice has been cleared away. The desk is clean. His mind is made up. There is a specific kind of silence that falls before an execution. It's the silence of inevitability. Truman picks up the telephone receiver. The operator connects him to the Commerce Department. The line clicks and hums. He isn't calling for a debate. He isn't calling to find common ground. He is calling to cut off a limb to save the body. "Get me Secretary Wallace," he says. Across town, Henry Wallace is likely preparing for another day of administrative work, perhaps still believing that his truce with the president is holding, that he has weathered the storm. He picks up the phone, expecting business as usual. "Henry." Truman's voice is flat, devoid of the Missouri warmth he's known for. "I am sorry, but I have reached the conclusion that it will be best that I ask for your resignation." The line goes quiet. You can almost hear the air being sucked out of the room on the other end. Wallace, the man who was once a heartbeat away from the presidency, the man who believed he was the moral compass of the administration, is stunned. He tries to respond, to be gracious. "If that is your decision, Mr. President," Wallace says, his voice steady but hollow, "I shall be happy to comply." There is no shouting, no dramatic slamming of receivers. It is clinically, brutally short. The call lasts less than 2 minutes. Truman hangs up. He doesn't slump back in his chair. He doesn't agonize. He immediately buzzes for Charlie Ross, his press secretary. "It's done," Truman says. "Let's tell the boys." At 10:30 a.m., the White House press corps is summoned. They crowd into the briefing room, smelling a story but unsure of the magnitude. The air is stale with tobacco and anticipation. Truman walks in. He doesn't smile. He doesn't joke. He looks like a man who has just walked through a fire and come out singed but standing.
He reads a prepared statement. It is short, sharp, and leaves no room for interpretation. The government of the United States must stand as a unit in its relations with the rest of the world, Truman reads, his eyes scanning the faces of the reporters. I have today asked Mr. Wallace to resign from the cabinet. The room explodes. Flashbulbs pop like mortar fire. Pencils scratch furiously against notepads. Men in fedoras sprint for the payphones in the hallway, shouting into the receivers to stop the presses. Wallace fired. Truman cracks the whip. It is the political equivalent of an earthquake. Truman has just fired the last remaining icon of the Roosevelt era. He has severed the link to the New Deal's idealistic past to forge a harder, colder future. In the Commerce Department, Wallace is packing his things. His staff is in tears. They feel like martyrs. They feel that peace itself has been fired from the U.S. government. Wallace writes a brief, polite resignation letter, but the bitterness is there, lurking beneath the ink. Back at the White House, the adrenaline is fading, replaced by a grim realization of what comes next. Truman walks to the window, looking out at the Rose Garden. He knows he did the right thing for the country's foreign policy. He stood by his Secretary of State. He showed Stalin that America speaks with one voice. But as he looks out at the gray September sky, he knows the bill is coming due. The midterms are weeks away. The Democratic Party is now split down the middle. He has alienated the unions, the progressives, the intellectuals. His approval ratings are already shaky. He stands alone in the Oval Office, the silence returning. He is now undeniably his own man. But being your own man is a lonely business. And while the domestic political storm is just beginning to howl, a far more dangerous shadow is lengthening across Europe. The firing of Henry Wallace wasn't just a cabinet shuffle. It was the final locking of the gate. The Cold War is no longer a theory. It is the official policy of the United States. Truman turns back to his desk. The peace is over. The struggle has begun.